So this is a training guide on how to rank up. So first of all, the first thing that we should be going over as far as how to rank up is the warm-up. Before you hop into a comp match, you always want to be hopping into at least full friends that you're going to play today or something like that. If you are not feeling it, don't feel like you have to, because it will kill you in the long run. Secondly, is you want to be avoiding being forced to play by decay, so try and stay a couple steps ahead in the ways of that. Just notice when you are going to be decaying, like going to be decaying in a few days. Try and play a couple days before that. Consider that you only have 5 days to decay and stuff like that. This is obviously only for people that actually are in Diamond Plus that I have to actually worry about that, but if you do reach that, it's going to be a pretty major problem, and it'll kill your love for comp if you're constantly being forced to play by decay, so try and stay ahead of that. Also, if you're taking a small break just from Overwatch, just before you play comp, like you're going to go 20 minutes to grab food, I'd recommend playing one more quick play match before you hop in, and you can also see if you're still feeling warm, stuff like that. Moving up, we're going to be going over to the actual stack, so everything from solo to a sextet stack, which is what it's actually technically called, or a six-man. So when playing in solo queue, DPS mains are going to be the best off for this, and that's why in general if you're playing support or tank, mostly for support mains, it's much better to be duo queuing at least with a DPS player, because it just makes everything easier, quite frankly. Also, if you are solo queuing, even if you're a DPS main or whatever you main, you want to be able to play at least one hero per category, so tank, support, and DPS. You don't have to worry about it quite as much if you're a tank or support player about playing DPS, because frankly there's about 1,000 of them per match somehow. It's also recommended that you know how to pick 2 of them, especially with tanks. There's a lot of support mains and DPS mains out there right now, and tanks is kind of a dying art, but I would not recommend playing tank in general. The SR for it is kind of fucked up. You don't gain very much, you lose a lot. It's not the best way to climb right now, but it is good in the ways of nobody really mains tank anymore. Moving on to duo queues, this really works best if you have a very, very strong synergy with the secondary player, and you're also playing complementary heroes such as Zarya Tracer combos, so you can do the Pulse Grav or a Mercy Pharah. Mercy Pharah is hands down the biggest one. Trio queues, don't be trying to queue with more than 2 type of a single main, so 2 DPS mains, 2 support mains, 2 tank mains, and also make sure that you can flex on to having like 2 tanks within your group, 2 supports within your group, and I guess if it is really required, 2 DPSs within your group, because chances are you're not going to be running into 3 randos that can play one of each individual class that you don't. So, moving on to a quartet or a 4-man, this is very heavy that you need to be making sure that you do have good synergy, and in general, this is where you want to be only doing this in the lower ranks, like, I think, Diamond and backwards or so. Funny that I'm saying that lower rank, but it's really not. But yes, do make sure that you have a heavy emphasis on synergy, because when you are selecting your own teammates and you are going into a match, when you have 4-man, it's going to be placing you against other 4-mans, and they're going to be focused on communication. So you need to be using that to the absolute maximum, because that's your only advantage over the other team. And if they have that better, they're going to win just for the fact that they are synergizing. Also, just keep in mind that the system can stack heavy SR disadvantages against you if you're on higher elos, or it just can't find another 4-man or something like that to queue you against, and it'll just give you higher players to play against otherwise, so keep that in mind, especially with like what time of day you're playing at. Doing a quintet stack, this is probably the worst stack that you can do. This has a high risk with a low reward to it, and this happens mostly when you're queuing up with a friend and maybe like a 3-stack or something, and then someone wants to invite one more guy, and then that guy invites another friend, then you're ending up with a 5-stack. If you have a very high skill disparity in the group, it's probably recommended that you don't play in that, because if you are the highest of all the SRs in that, and you're just right within the SR gap that's allowed, which is 1,000 or 500, whatever, then you are going to be losing a lot more and gaining a lot less per win, and it's just not going to be worth it for you to be queuing in that group, especially for climbing-wise. Next up is a sextet stack. This is usually only recommended up to platinum. Beyond there, you need to making sure that you have very, very good comms. Like, you could take this into a scrimmage and be playing in teams and stuff like that against that. Make sure that you're taking advantage of the fact that you choose who you're playing with, who you are grouping with. Make sure that you do have that synergy. This is very similar to all previous stacks, but this needs to be emphasized more than anything, that you have a very good synergy with every person in that stack. If you do not enjoy playing with one of those people, it can heavily, heavily go against you. Okay? When you're playing in a sextet stack, or even a 5-stack, really, try and assign a shot caller to be calling targets, to be focusing down. This seems like something that you only really need in higher level plays, but it's the single tip that can turn a sextet stack into something just completely garbage to actually very, very good. Just make sure that you're prioritizing targets. It doesn't matter if they're calling the correct targets, as long as you're focusing down one target, it's better than just going off into chaos and everybody's focusing their own and playing like 1v1s, basically. Just before you queue into comp, make sure that everybody in your group has a good idea of what they're going to be playing, especially per map, stuff like that. Go over a little bit of strategy. You don't have to go too heavy on it necessarily, depending on the rank at least, but do keep that in mind. After the matches, discuss what went well and what could have gone better. That'll really help, especially in the long run, if you do plan on playing again with that 6-stat stack. That goes over everything for these stacks. Do we have any questions for that?
Just out of curiosity, what would be your personal preference, like at the rank you're playing at, which is High Masters, was it?
No, I'm at GM now. I would say
GM.
that I prefer to stick with duo queues even. I'm not quite comfortable with trio queues, and I don't think I have anybody that I can... Because, in general, as I said, you want to be queuing with a tank, a support, and a DPS, and most of the tank mains that I know don't actually have any microphones, so that really hurts that in the long run. You don't want to be trio queuing with that, so I stick to duo queues myself. Alright, next up I want to go over a couple things with communication. This is going to be a fairly short segment, just a couple tips. Hopping into team chat, this is very obvious, but say hello, try and get the positivity flowing through the team. It seems really corny, but it helps more than anybody can actually imagine. Because when you hear somebody come in and just say, hey, fuck you all, leaves voice chat, picks Hanzo, not the greatest feeling in the world. Use the comms for what they're meant for, making general callouts that will help your team, enemy locations. If you lower somebody, especially playing as DPS and somebody's half, call that out. Don't feel like you are the only person that can kill that person or that you're the carry or things like that, because that's just not going to help. You need to make sure that you're coordinating with your team. Alright, and the big one is calling out combos. Graviton, this is a pretty obvious one that you want to be calling out with Pulse Bomb, stuff like that, but stacking ults is very important. Well, it can be very detrimental if you're stacking like 4 ults to try and get 2 picks or something like that. But let's say Genji goes in with the Dragon Blade and he's only able to get 1 kill, and then shortly after a D.Va throws in her mech bomb and gets 1 kill, no kills with that. If you were to throw those in at the same time, it could zone people off and group them up so the Genji could have gotten multiple kills with that. Right, moving on to the in-game mentality. This one's just how you should be acting in-game. So firstly, obviously, just be as positive as possible. This seems really corny yet again, but you need to make sure that when you are going into comp that you are feeling it, you are positive about it. Don't be putting on like a fake facade. If you are putting on the fake facade, that should only be when you're already halfway through a game and you've just tilted because of that match. Don't be continuing if you are already tilted. This is a huge thing. Everybody should know this by now. Secondly, don't dwell on the mistakes of others. Someone throws a Graviton into a DM, don't call them out for it. Like, I mean, yeah, there can be a slight remarks and, you know, stuff like that can be acceptable to a point, but don't dwell on it. All you're going to do is you're going to make your Zarya feel really shitty, or they're going to get, like, aggravated at them, they're going to start talking shit, and you're just going to get this really hated relationship going on between the two of you, and it's not going to get you anywhere. It's literally just negative. Ignore it. You want to talk about it with your friends afterwards, go ahead, talk about how bad that Graviton was, but don't bring it up in-game. Thirdly, I should say, don't blame the randos. This is a huge crutch. Don't be just blaming the randos for everything. I do understand that, especially if they both insta-block DPS, Hanzo, Widow, whatever. It probably is their fault that they're just complete shit and they should not have picked DPS, but just blaming them, especially going over the voice comms and blaming that, or stuff like that, circle jerking over that, it's not going to get you anywhere. You aren't going to be getting anything positive out of that. Focus on what you can do yourself to start trying to compensate for their stupidity. Next up, try to resolve any conflicts that come up. So if, yet again, going back to the Zarya throwing a Graviton into a DM, if someone is going off on Zarya, then just interject, say, you know what, cut it, leave it, let's just continue with the game. Using humor to lighten the mood, this is a good general tip. This is a little bit more on the meh side, not too required, but it really does help. Compliment good plays. Now, you don't want to be saying, hey, McCree, you hit a really nice shot right there, and then as he makes another shot, call that one out too. Just don't do that. It doesn't mean anything if you're calling literally every play out. But, you know, just complimenting somebody for a good play every, like, once, twice a match or something like that, it will really make someone feel a lot better, especially if you don't do it very commonly at all and you're saying, you know what, that was a really nice play. It can really help with positive mentality, especially if that person's already feeling shitty, someone's going off on them in team chat. And lastly, if you do find anybody in the game that you did like, you know, you guys have a similar mindset, you joke around a lot, you have a good synergy, make sure you friend them. I don't know, some people don't do that, but don't be afraid to send somebody a friend request if you did like them. Worst that happens, they just ignore your friend request. Big things. Firstly, when you should stop is, firstly, when the fun stops, you stop. Do not continue playing if you're not feeling it, because all you're going to do is tilt it. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you are tilted just because you're not having fun, but if you are not having fun with comp in general, like, especially when it comes down to decay and you're playing just to push off the decay, don't do that. Don't let that happen to you, because you're not going to enjoy comp at all, then you're not going to want to play, so you're going to play worse in general, and really, you play video games to have fun. What are you doing this? And yeah, just avoid trying to play when you're tilted or angry. And secondly, live by the 2-loss rule. This thing saves lives, as Roman says. It's the biggest thing. And some people, especially if you just spam play comp a lot and you play like average of like 5 matches per day or something, then you could push that up to a 3-loss rule. But if you're somebody that only likes to play just enough to push off decay or stuff like that, which you really shouldn't do, but live by that tooth Ross rule, it'll really help. Alright, self-improvement. This is something that a lot of people don't realize that you can do for some reason. You think it's so obvious, but focus on what you can do to improve. So first thing is, I see a lot of people that think they deserve a rank that are too higher than they already are. Cut that. Don't kid yourself. Don't do that. Think about it honestly. Do I actually deserve that rank? And if you do, then you should already be 2 ranks higher if you really deserve that, or at least 1 rank under what you deserve. Otherwise, there is probably some sort of problem. I'm not saying that you're a bad player, that necessarily you're never going to be able to climb, but you need to focus on what the problems are at hand rather than trying to say it's your teammates' fault, they're all shit, or you're just getting unlucky in comp. Focus on what you can do to compensate for that. Secondly is try to pin down multiple problems that you can work on. This very similarly relates to the last point, but you want to be pinning down multiple things, especially if you're not using the comms enough, or let's say you don't even have a microphone, try working on using like the in-game commands. For example, by default, press F, understood, you can aim at a target or a point that'll say, okay, go attack this objective. Stuff like that in the voice chat or just the text chat will really help out your team in long run, ways that they may not even notice, because a lot of times you may not even look at that, but the one time that you do look at that and then you say, oh, they're saying push the point, and oh shit, someone's trying to back cap, and then you hop back, that one time is worth it for hitting that button 400 times. When you make a bad play, think what your reasoning was and why you exactly did that. Let's say you're going into a fight with Zarya, you throw Graviton into a DM, but think, why did you go into that? Let's say you've been holding on to Graviton for the past minute and you really wanted to get that off. Be weary of what the DM is, what the percentage is at, where the diva is. In general, don't be throwing a defense matrix or throwing a Zarya Graviton anywhere near a defense matrix or in mech diva. Except when you die, think about what you could have done to avoid that specific scenario. This is a pretty huge tip for me personally, especially with characters that are flankers, stuff like that. If you're hopping into the middle of a fight, you get flashbanged by a McCree, get insta-kicked, and you could just blame your team. You could say you're sorry, I didn't bubble you right there. Think about what you could have done to avoid that exact scenario, though. Let's say you suspected that he could have had flashbang. You had no reason to believe he didn't have the flashbang. Why did you go into the McCree then? You should not have. You should just avoid him. It seems like a very negative thing to do, but try and focus on what things you're doing yourself wrong, and even in scenarios where it just blatantly should have been somebody else doing that, what could you have done to avoid that scenario? So you weren't going to be hinging on relying on teammates to be better and stuff like that.
Question.
I'll get to that in a second.
In terms of like focusing when you do something wrong and like not doing it in the future, would you say you should also try and like really focus on the things that you normally wouldn't do, but you just felt like doing in that moment and it worked out? And trying to pick stuff from there where you thought you were going to lose, but it didn't. You just tried something new and try to see why it worked.
You could definitely try that. That's what a lot of people do when there's a rework on a hero or a new hero is released. They try pushing it to the absolute limit in quick play. Mostly don't try necessarily doing this in comp unless you have like an alt account or something, which still is kind of hinging on like the blurry lines, but you can definitely try and push yourself to the limits and see what your character can do, what you can get away with at certain elos and stuff like that. But in general, it's better to play slightly safer than you believe you should when you're playing in comp, unless you specifically know that something's going to work out. Personally, I want to go over understanding the system and, in ways, abusing the SR system. You want to be taking advantage of SRs. Like, you want to be listening up for Overwatch news, especially, I'm not sure if anybody heard about it, but after Mercy rework went live for about 2 days, there was a huge problem with Mercy SR. She was gaining like 28 SR and losing like 18. If you're a support player or anything that you even slightly know how to play Mercy, you should be hopping on that and try and use that really quickly, because these things get patched fairly quickly in the game, and you want to be using these if you are just dedicated to climbing. A lot of people say it's a scummy move. It works, and there are other people that are going to be abusing it no matter what. You can't do anything about that. Blizzard has to do something about that. Going over exactly how the SR system works. Nobody really knows exactly how it works, but we have a lot of speculations. For example, it seems like some people gain more SR if they switch a lot during a match. Not necessarily to the point where they never have ults or they get like literally no stats with any character, but they swap, let's say, on defense and offense, and they're playing different roles. That kind of stuff does seem to help SR. We do know that the game will actually compare your stats to another or other players of a similar rank, let's say as McCree, how many shots you're hitting per minute, how many critical hits, what your accuracy is. It'll be comparing that to people of a similar rank, and you need to be thinking exactly what stats can you just excel in completely. So, example being like Mercy Res, for example, if you're just focusing on getting a lot of reses, which was what the main problem was, it was comparing it to the old number of reses to the new number of reses, and it was almost always like twice and a half times more, so it was giving people a lot of SR and losing a lot less. Tanks right now are pretty fucked. They're not getting very much SR, and they're losing quite a substantial amount, which is just screwed up in general. In general, DPSs, they tend to be the carry classes, so they have been balanced around. Don't ever think that you're not getting a fair amount of SR. Chances are you're probably just not doing too well, particularly that match. There have been matches where it just analyzes the stats incorrectly and it won't give you a truly proper amount of SR, even if you carried. But chances are that it does have a decent idea of how good it was, so it's not like you're going to be gaining only 12 SR when you should have gotten 30 plus. I just want to go over VOD reviews, as what you mentioned. This kind of goes back to the self-improvement stage, but this is specifically for sextet stacking, stuff like that. And this doesn't apply necessarily just to comp, but to improving as a player in general. Doing VOD reviews is extremely important. You want to be as picky and nitpicky as possible while doing a VOD review. If you can, like especially during scrimmages and stuff like that against other teams, if you can get somebody that's doing a third-person perspective recording, that is very, very useful, and that'll give you a much better insight to the location. But if you can try recording your own perspective, that's the next best thing, rather than watching what your plays are from like your tracer's point of view or something like that. And pay attention to every little mistake that you're doing, even if you think it's something very picky and something that you wouldn't have known in the past. Let's say you go for a res on a Lucio, and then immediately after your Reinhardt dies, you'd say, well, how was I supposed to know Reinhardt was going to die? I didn't know in the past time. But you could have been paying attention to his health bar in current time, seeing exactly what was going on. If anybody was diving him before he res the Lucio, what's the value of the Lucio? Has he been impacting that match specifically? It's kind of hard to explain VOD reviews in general, but watching them kind of frame by frame, just continuing over, don't be afraid to skip back a lot during them, and just be as picky as possible. It's going to take down your self-esteem quite a bit, but it really does help for improvement.
Wanted to add on to that. A rule you should always follow when you do VOD reviews, and something that actually helps, is that if you're the most critical person of your own play, then when someone targets you in a game, it actually helps you, because you don't get as offended by what their comments say.
That could definitely be a big point. And I think, as a final, I want to kind of go over smurfing and smurfs in general. A lot of people, mostly in other games, will just absolutely despise smurfs because they feel like they're ruining the entire fun of the game. And in some cases, if you're playing in like Silver and there's a GM, DPS, McCree, main smurf, whatever on the enemy team, he's just going to completely raffle stomp over you. But there's also going to be, in theory, a roughly equal amount of games where you're going to be having a smurf carry on your team. Sometimes he won't notice quite as well, but it's quite possible that he's just completely carrying and nobody really notices how many kills he's getting because someone else is stealing the final blows or something like that. In general, don't worry yourself too much with random smurfs because you're going to be having just as many on your team as a rough rule, unless you're doing like 3 stacking, then yeah, you're going to be getting less. But don't focus on smurfs and don't act like they're the core problem of the game at all. I haven't heard very many people ever complain about this, so I hope that's not really a problem here, but they are not the biggest problem with the game. And as far as actually queuing with smurfs, I would not recommend queuing necessarily with a support main smurf that's like 1 rank higher than what you currently are. They're not going to be a carry. They're not what you're necessarily looking for. Tank and DPS mains are going to be the best people to be queuing with, specifically DPS mains, especially somebody like, for example, Pharah. Pharah works very well and everything up to about like Diamond. That's when it starts getting a little bit tougher, but if the player is much better than the current rank, then they're going to be able to carry in general. So making friends with smurfs, if you do suspect somebody is a smurf during a match, I think that might not be a bad idea and stuff like that. It's, yet again, one of the scummier tactics, but it works. That's all I can really say about it. Is there any questions?
Okay, so like about smurfs, what would you say to the idea of getting a smurf purely to kind of reset your MMR? If you know for a fact that you've improved quite drastically since you started playing the game, to kind of help your MMR not be, in a way, artificially lowered by that?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I've seen a couple people do this. I can't remember any of the names, but there was a couple friends outside of AOD that did this, and it's not exactly a horrible idea, but I feel like if you do put enough time and determination, and you just generally have a lot of time on your hands that you can put into playing Overwatch comp, you will be able to climb slowly but surely. If you are in a complete rut like Silver or something like that, or something, and people just aren't cooperating, it is actually possible that RNG's basically got your back and they're just saying fuck you, and if you do get an ult account and you place flat or something, and you're able to consistently play at that rank, then you deserve that, but it's just holding you back on your main account, and it's, I say, a viable strategy if it is really in that big of a rut. But in the ways of, if you are a platinum and you're like 2900 and you want to get to 3100 and you're just getting completely stuck, I would not say that really justifies the purchase. In general, the main takeaway from this should be is, don't be focusing on what other people are doing. Focus on trying to improve yourself in what you can do better, even if it is technically somebody else's fault. Don't be dwelling on the past mistakes and stuff like that. Focus on what you can do in the next match to just improve your general play and compensate for teammates.
Remember that for every mistake someone else on your team made, you made the same mistake that you just didn't know, it wasn't pointed out. You also got the fact that for every mistake someone on your team made, someone on the other team made a mistake as well that probably allowed you to get that triple kill you got earlier in the game.
If there was ever a post by Blizzard saying that there is a final like SR fix for tanks or something like that, I would actually recommend maining tanks because there's not very many of those out there, and it'll be a great way to actually be climbing, especially with Roadhog, because Roadhog can get a lot of elims and stuff like that, and the MMR system does prefer characters that can do damage, get elims, objective kills, and objective time.
I actually find at the moment that, in my opinion, in terms of tanks, the best one to take is Winston. Because even though tanks, you don't see a lot of them at the moment, if you play Winston well enough, you can avoid a lot of they got 5 stack of DPS, but you can still sort of like kite around them a bit, get enough healing to stay alive. And I, like myself playing, I would usually end up with gold elims, gold damage, a lot of goals there just from zapping everybody, but not necessarily solo killing a load of people. It's just sort of
getting the touches on people and
touch everybody. And it really does. There's a noticeable difference in how much SR I'm getting compared to anything else I play. I'll climb a hell of a lot quicker with him than others.
Yeah, I would say that, especially if you are playing as Winston and you want to duo queue with a main support, that would actually work fairly well. That'd probably be one of the better duo queues to do with a support player. And it's going to be more of a niche role that not many people are going to be wanting to play regardless, so yeah, that would be a definite way that you could do. Especially if you're somebody that wants to focus on maining one hero. And that's one thing I actually should have gone over before. One tricking. A lot of people try doing, like, you know, these massive flex rosters that they can play, like, 18 out of 23 heroes in the game or whatever. That's not going to help you too much in the long run. You're not going to need to play that many characters in general. Just pay attention to what's the current meta and try and focus on playing at least, you know, 3 characters within the current meta. And focusing most of your time onto one character that you generally don't run into too many mains of does help. Being very proficient at one character and in general that you don't have to switch off that character, then it'll help you climbing. Alright, we got anything else then?
What do you think the best heroes are to climb with?
Right now, Mercy. Yeah, hands down, Mercy.
Yeah.
Mercy's SR is, they said that they fixed it. I find that it's still a little bit teetering on the broken side, but it's, you know, not like you should feel bad or something that if you can't climb with it or something. It's fairly balanced, but it's probably among the more broken as of right now with current roster. As you mentioned earlier, Winston, he's a very good character to be climbing with. DPS-wise, that's very per rank basis, but Pharah in general, especially around like the gold to plat levels, that's a very, very proficient hero. Being able to play a hit scan is a very key role, especially even if you're just going to try and flex onto a hit scan and there's like a Pharah that's giving your team trouble, that'd be very useful. In the ways of heals, pretty much Mercy, Lucia are the only way to go. D.Va's very viable for doing damage right now, as far as I can tell. She's still a little bit on the weird side. It seems like Roadhog's getting partially back into meta, so he might not be a bad character to be picking.
I'm actually finding that Roadhog down in the plat elo anyways is actually very, very good at the moment. There's not a lot of people playing him, and not a lot of people are playing his counters. So when they do have to flex onto his counters, it's not doing the best because it's not used to it. And he can still pump out a load of damage onto the tanks, which I find in plat elo. If you can kill the tanks, you've basically won the fight immediately. Even if you, doesn't matter if you hit the healers or DPS. As soon as their Rhine shield or their D.Va goes, the rest of them just die immediately.
I can't say necessarily per rank too much anymore. I haven't experienced too many of the ranks as of recent, but yeah, last time I was playing with Roadhog, he was very efficient at that level because not many people really understand that Roadhog existing means that there's like this 20-meter radius that you should not be entering as long as you have that hook cooldown or you don't have a shield. And he's very good for zoning out people, especially with his ult. He can actually push people off the points. He's pretty good for control point maps.
Would you say there are some heroes that be inherently more stressful to play and therefore might cause you to have to play less? Like if the kind of person that blitzes out a load of games in a night, there'll be some heroes that you might not want to be playing a load of games on in quick succession, and there'll be others that you could play a load.
I would say that DPS characters in general are something that you tend to get a lot more expent on, stuff like that. Any characters that require a lot of precision mechanical skill. So that's why tanks and supports are fairly good, unless you're playing like Ana, Zen, those tend to be more on like the DPS charts as far as how tired you get playing those characters. But if you get very good at the character, you just put a lot of time into a character, you start getting into this molded mindset of how to play the character, and it really helps with just pumping out games a lot. And in general, redundancy is a fairly big key. If you can just keep going at comp without being affected too much as far as tilt. You can't just say that you're not tilted, you have to actually not be tilted. You can lie to everybody else, say that you're not tilted, but you can't lie to yourself. Just be honest with yourself. If you're not feeling it, then don't continue.
One other question. Would you say... this is more like focused on DPS, but DPS heroes who fill the same role let's just take hit scan for example. Say, yeah, which would be Soldier versus McCree mainly, because not many people I find can play a lot of Widow. Would you say if you're decent enough on hit scan, it wouldn't really mash it all together too much? If you could say you could hit consistent with both McCree and Soldier, that you could take either one and it'd work
I would say that
relatively
you
as
should be
effective as each
picking.
other.
I would say that you should be picking those characters. Like, you shouldn't necessarily run both of them at the same time, but running them per map is a much better idea, especially with a map that has more high ground control, or yeah, high ground control in general is what votes more for Soldier holding like specific points, whereas McCree can work better in more enclosed areas where you're holding on the low ground, you're on equal ground with your enemy, or they're jumping down onto you, because that flashbang is an absolutely insane CC if used correctly.
I think the question was kind of just not so much like in terms of those different like almost segments of the DPS roster that would work similarly to each other, but have their slight differences. That you wouldn't really need to worry altogether too much about
Overlapping?
yeah, overlapping. I think I'm really tired right now, so I'm trying to put it like fucking
Right.
question into words correctly.
Well, yeah, in general, you don't have to worry too much about overlap, because as long as you know how to play a couple different DPSs like McCree Pharah or something like that, and you can do that at an equal level, both, like, you can play Pharah and McCree equivalently, in other words, then you're going to be fine. You shouldn't really have to worry about too much overlap, but if you can just play only Soldier McCree, then you know what, that works in a lot of scenarios too, especially in lower ranks. It's only really essential to have, like, two very different styles of DPS when you start getting into, like, I'd say mid-diamond plus is about the point where that starts to click on, but in general, then you want to be working on getting a wider variety within the DPS roster.
Yeah. Oh, right, I figured out how to fucking say it properly. Oh my god. So it just notes that the same situation. It wouldn't really matter altogether too much which of them you were playing, because they work. So Soldier and McCree work very similar to each other, and as long as you're consistent on either one of them, the DPS can be either greater with McCree over Soldier, depending on how consistent. But let's just say you were hitting enough shots to make it the same, that it wouldn't really matter which one you were playing in the same situation.
Well, with Soldier and
Too
McCree
much.
specifically, I feel like you can feel like you're playing a little bit better on one character per day, because one of them requires more flick aiming and then the other one's a little bit more on tracking. I would say that it's more important to keep you on what you're feeling comfortable with at the time than it is for anything else. If you're like bending the entire team comp to be around you just because you don't feel like playing McCree today, that's a different story in general, but if you're just feeling like Soldier today, then try playing Soldier a little bit more, even if it's not quite the best map for him. One thing that you might want to take into account, though, is just press P at the beginning of a match, just hover over the enemy team's names, look at what their ranks are, and look at what their characters are, what characters they have the most playtime on, a general idea of what they're going to be playing in general. And you want to be picking to counter against those heroes, so you see a Pharah coming out, you obviously want to be having a McCree coming out. Especially if there's like a Pharah Mercy duo queue, you want to be sure that you're putting a lot of emphasis on that, and make sure that you're calling that out to your team if you're in a solo queue or whatever, and you still have randos on your team. And one thing, a lot of people have this huge illusion that just because you are getting steamrolled right now, that means you have to switch up the comp. That's not, in general, that's actually not the case. You are just probably not playing the comp correctly, or you're just not playing well. Something about you guys isn't working together correctly. It's not your comp always. So don't just feel like you need to switch off constantly, because that's going to destroy your ultimate economy and any semblance that you have of that. All right.
Like, just actually based off of that, this is a bit of a weird question, but like, in terms of the whole, you're getting yourself, you're getting destroyed, but no one else is. Would you say there's any particular factors to look for in terms of telling whether it's just you playing badly or something else, some outside factor is just like say I was playing Winston, right? I was getting absolutely just hammered in, but we were still winning the fights afterwards. That's something that I actually.
The enemy team is suggesting you as a threat and they're focusing you down, which it might actually not be a bad idea to just continue on the character, because if you are just absorbing all the damage, which is in general what a tank's technically supposed to do, and your team's still winning the fights after that, yeah, keep going with it. If it's working, then it's working.
Really well with Pharah. It happens a lot of the time where you feel like you're not doing anything on Pharah, but your team's still winning every single fight. And the reason for that is that the other team is putting 100% emphasis onto killing the Pharah, and they're putting absolutely no emphasis on what the team on the ground are doing. In that case, it's worth staying on the hero, because at the end of the day, you're obviously creating the adequate distraction as need be.
Fair enough.
Especially if you say that, like, you have one round, let's say, an attack, you just absolutely steamroll over the enemy team, or only, like, let's say, half of the map, and then you suddenly get really hard countered, but your team is still doing well enough, then that means that you are just taking a lot of focus fire, and they've said that you are the threat. And yet again, that's a scenario that you don't necessarily need to swap off on. If your team is still winning, then something's working.
Is there any situations in your mind where you'd need to preemptively switch?
What do you mean by preemptively?
Like, not like you haven't really say you won the fight, you look at their team roster, you can see that they've switched things up a bit. You're coming back from spawn, the rest of your team is there. Are there any situations where you'd go, right, a problem hasn't happened yet, but due to some changes that have just happened, it's probably going to be a massive issue really soon,
absolutely.
so I'd
If
have
you're
to
saying
switch.
Yeah, if you stay vigilant on what the enemy team comp is, especially like you say you're running a far Junkrat comp or something like that, and you're far, I don't know, for let's say, I'm trying to think of another character other than Pharah, something that can't counter Pharah, and you're just coming out of spawn right now as the secondary DPS, and you see the enemy team swap to a Pharah, obviously you want to be swapping to Pharah. That's a very simplified version of this entire idea, but if you do suspect that they're going to be trying to swap something up and it's just going to absolutely steamroll over your team, then go for it. But if it's something that's a little bit more questionable and you're not sure if they're going to steamroll over you with it, then you could give it one try and, you know, just stay on the heroes that you're currently on. If they steamroll through it, switch it up, see what else you can go with. But if they're still not doing too well even on the counters, then just continue. Because you don't want to be switching constantly for absolutely no reason, because you're going to be killing your ultimates and ultimate economy, because a lot of this game is based around ultimate economy. I think that about wraps it up, though.